The amazing story of the 4-minute mile that was broken 70 years ago. That story, our top story, is on the snooker table at Sheffield Crucible because Kyron Wilson is the new world champion. He beat Jack Jones 18 frames to 14. You can read more about that on the BBC Sport app or the BBC Sport website. But from me and the rest of the team, that's all for now.
Hello. Well, your bank holiday Monday probably came with a rain interruption at some point. It was pretty unsettled. Some lengthy spells of rain across the southeast of England, but plenty of showers elsewhere. Others, though, managed some sunshine, and in Lincolnshire we had 11 hours of sun, so it wasn't so bad there, whereas others had the downpours. And across parts of northern England, had a couple of funnel clouds spotted, one over Saddleworth Moor and another one in the Derbyshire area. The weather is going to be improving, though, over the next few days as a ridge of high pressure starts to move its way in, and that will tend to settle the weather down. Slow process. We've still got a bit of rain left over across southeast England, 1 or 2 showers elsewhere, but these will tend to fizzle over the coming hours. And temperatures as we start off Tuesday morning, generally around 8 to 10. The coldest spots down to about 5 degrees. And that's probably where we'll have the best of the early morning sunshine. Now, where you do start off the day cloudy, and particularly around some of these North Sea coasts, it could be quite grey, some mist and fog patches around, a few spots of drizzle, but it is an improving picture for the majority. Cloud will thin and break up with sunny spells becoming widespread into the afternoon. Outside chance for a shower? Yeah, it's possible, perhaps across the hills of Wales and southwest England, 1 or 2 elsewhere, but not as many as we've seen over recent days. The vast majority of you will have a dry day and it will feel warmer. The sunshine comes out. The high pressure continues to build in for Wednesday, but we do have weather fronts that will try to sneak in from the northwest. So Wednesday, again, it should be a fine day for the vast majority of the country. Certainly England, Wales, most of Northern Ireland looking dry with spells of warm sunshine, probably quite hazy sunshine. There will be some high cloud in the sky, but across the Hebrides, Highlands, Orkney and Shetland, it will turn cloudy, quite windy with outbreaks of rain moving in. In the sunshine, though, temperatures more widely climbing into the low 20s, so feeling progressively warmer. Thursday, you've still got a risk of a few showers this time for Scotland. Otherwise, some broken cloud and sunny spells. Should be another dry day for most areas of Northern Ireland, England and Wales. And again, those temperatures continue to climb. We're up to 19 in Belfast. The warmest weather probably across eastern England, where temperatures will reach around 22, possibly 23 degrees Celsius. That is going to feel warm in the sunshine. And there is more of that sunshine as we finish the week and head into the weekend, albeit probably with an increasing risk of seeing some showers moving in. That's today's weather. Bye-bye.
I want to talk to you about the politics of this. Did she not think she was going to get that question?
It's important to remember that this is a negotiation.
It's a good photo of.
I have an opportunity to create chaos.
There is always an email. We are so insignificant in this cosmos. Do you want some facts on baguettes? I'm just feeding you the stories. Maybe this is The Context.
The Context, weeknights from 8 p.m. on BBC News and iPlayer.
Hello and welcome to Newsday. I'm Steve Lai, reporting live from Singapore. The headlines. Celebrations in Gaza as Hamas says it has accepted the terms of a proposed ceasefire, but Israel says it does not meet its key demands. The personal information of serving British military personnel has been accessed in a significant data breach. French President Emmanuel Macron welcomes new assurances from Xi Jinping that China will not provide Russia with weapons to use against Ukraine. And the Met Gala returns with guests arriving on the red carpet for fashion's biggest night of the year.
Live from our studio in Singapore. This is BBC News. It's Newsday.
And we start this hour in the Middle East, where Israel has attacked Hamas targets in the eastern part of Rafah, the group's last Gaza stronghold. The armed Palestinian Islamic Jihad faction, which operates alongside Hamas, fired rockets at southern Israel after reports of the Israeli operations. The strikes followed a rollercoaster of diplomatic activity after a ceasefire proposal by Qatar and Egypt was accepted by Hamas but quickly rejected by Israel. The day had begun with orders for the evacuation of 100,000 residents and refugees in Rafah. The Israeli army dropped thousands of leaflets over the city, informing the Palestinians the IDF would soon be expanding its operation against what it says are terrorist operations in the eastern parts of the city. Around 100,000 people were warned they would need to relocate to Al-Mawasi, an expanded safe zone, as they described it, east of Khan Yunis. But then hours later, Hamas announced that the ceasefire had now been revived and accepted. Outside the Al-Aqsa hospital in Gaza, there were celebrations at the news. But Israel did not react warmly to the deal. Prime Minister Netanyahu said it did not meet Israel's demands and they will continue their operation in Rafah in southern Gaza. 5 people have been reportedly killed in Israeli airstrikes on Rafah. Our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, who's in Jerusalem, says that even though Israel hasn't agreed to the deal, the proposal has had some effect.
They have at least agreed to do what they didn't do at the weekend, which is to send a delegation of mediators, experts in their view, to try and thrash out a deal. They've said that the terms that Hamas have agreed to are very far from what meets their needs, but they're not ruling it out. So I think there is a degree of optimism here. But at the same time, as I mentioned, they are continuing their push, their military push, against the wishes of the Americans in Rafah. And that is controversial because all the aid agencies are saying this could be a catastrophic result for the civilians there. And essentially, I think if you had to sum up the Israeli position, it would be keep talking, but keep fighting.
Earlier, the US State Department spokesman Matthew Miller gave its response to the Hamas announcement.
So I can confirm that Hamas has issued a response. We are reviewing that response now and discussing it with our partners in the region. As you know, Director Burns is in the region working on this in real time. We will be discussing this response with our partners over the coming hours. We continue to believe that a hostage deal is in the best interests of the Israeli people. It's in the best interests of the Palestinian people. It would bring an immediate ceasefire. It would allow increased movement of humanitarian assistance, and so we're going to continue to work to try to reach one.
I spoke to our North America correspondent, David Willis, who told me more about Washington's response.
A cautious reaction, Steve, as perhaps you might expect. The White House National Security spokesman John Kirby telling reporters that the United States was, as he put it, evaluating the deal from Hamas, or word from Hamas, and he went on to say that it was a highly sensitive time and he didn't want to say anything that might upend the ongoing negotiations. Later we heard, as you just heard, from Matthew Miller, the US State Department spokesman, who said that some sort of deal was achievable. All this after President Biden had spoken by phone to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That before word came down that Hamas had accepted a ceasefire deal, and President Biden, according to the White House readout, reinforced his opposition to any sort of military operation in Rafah. Nonetheless, Nevertheless, such an operation has gone ahead, a sign, I think, perhaps, of how limited the United States leverage is as far as the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu is concerned, a hardline government that has yielded to very little by way of requests from the US for a ceasefire, for greater access to humanitarian aid, and so on as far as Gaza is concerned. Steve.
Yeah, David, President Biden has been pushing for a ceasefire. As you mentioned, Israel's continuing to attack Rafah, calling for evacuations. This is only going to increase pressure on the US president, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's very much a political hot potato here, this being, of course, an election year, less than 6 months to go before Americans go to the polls here, and President Biden, of course, seeking re-election. He's come under criticism from some in his own party for failing to curb Israel's invasion in Gaza and for the growing death toll there. Progressives, of course, have called on him to do more, but he has, as I mentioned, really been very limited in the influence that he's been able to exert on Benjamin Netanyahu. We've seen, of course, nationwide protests at universities and college campuses over the course of the last week or so. And indeed, there is a report by Axios, the news agency Axios, that the United States last week decided to curtail a military shipment to Israel in an attempt to gain some sort of leverage over Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet.
That was our North America correspondent David Willis, and we'll be bringing you a report from our special correspondent Fergal Keane later in the programme, which has more on the reaction to Hamas agreeing to a proposed ceasefire and the evacuation beginning in Rafah. Now, though, to a developing story, and there has been a significant data breach involving the UK Ministry of Defence. Our correspondent Alex Forsyth has more.
Well, what we know so far is that a third party has accessed in an unauthorised fashion a payroll system used by the Ministry of Defence. Now, this system is run by an external contractor, so this is not the main Ministry of Defence computer, and no operational detail has been obtained. But what has been accessed is personal details of serving members of the armed forces, mostly names and bank account details, but also in a very small, I'm told, number of cases, some addresses as well. These are people who are currently serving in the Royal Navy, in the Army, in the RAF, but also some veterans as well. Now, we're not sure yet, or it's not been confirmed yet, who is behind this or what that data is being used for, but it's clearly a very significant breach. The Ministry of Defence, I'm told, took immediate action, so that system has been taken offline, and there are clearly investigations going on to ascertain the scale of this and any more information behind it. The Ministry of Defence is in the process of contacting the people who were involved, whose information was accessed. I'm told it's HMRC-style personal information that was accessed. And the MOD is looking at ways that it can support and advise those individuals, also talking to veterans groups, because, as I say, a number of people involved were former members of the armed forces. We also understand the UK Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, is due to update on MPs in the House of Commons on this tomorrow and set out a plan, an action plan, a response plan, but also a plan to ensure the protection of all serving men and women in the armed forces. So I think this is clearly a very significant development. Clearly quite a lot still to be learnt about exactly what's happened. We're very likely to hear much more about it in the House of Commons tomorrow, but I also suspect a lot of questions from MPs who are concerned at what's happened and want some more information.
Xi Jinping's first trip to Europe in 5 years has kicked off in Paris, with trade tensions and the war in Ukraine topping the agenda. French President Emmanuel Macron and the EU Commission's chief Ursula von der Leyen warned that Chinese overproduction was flooding the European Union with industrial goods and electric vehicles. Now, earlier, during a press conference, President Xi Jinping spoke about the ongoing war in Ukraine.
We have not stood idly by and have always played an active role in achieving peace. The Chinese government's special representative for Eurasian affairs has begun his third shuttle diplomacy. At the same time, we are opposed to this crisis being used to shift blame onto a third country, tarnish its image, and to incite a new Cold War.
Cindy Yu is the assistant editor at The Spectator. She gave me her reaction to Mr. Xi's comments.
It's very much what China has always said when it comes to the war in Ukraine, that this is a war on a different continent, that whilst the West and especially America has this kind of ethical view about international relations, China doesn't think that it's got any interest in this war. That's what it says, and it has made these kind of perfunctory moves to have a peacekeeping operation with this peace envoy, as well as a 12-point peace plan in the early days of the war. At the same time, what Europeans and Americans are worried about is the fact that China has continued to sell dual-use technologies to Russia, and that means basically things like drones or silicon chips that can have military use. These would have been trade contracts that happened before the war, but that haven't stopped since then. They're not sanctioned items, and China doesn't think that it needs to stop them. But of course, when it comes to European capitals and America, there is a concern that China is making this war last longer than it needs to.
Well, we know that China prefers bilateral relationships rather than dealing with blocs. So if we bring our attention back to France, why has he picked France as his first stop on this tour of Europe?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think that it's because France is seen as one of the most Sino-sympathetic countries in Europe. Now, I use that term because I don't think France is pro-China at all. But I do think that France, compared to some other European actors like European Commission under Ursula von der Leyen, is more willing to keep its mind open or have a sympathetic ear to the Chinese cause. We saw that last year when Macron visited China, and afterwards he basically said that Taiwan wasn't the West's problem. France consistently says stuff to kind of distance itself from America and basically have this kind of strategic autonomy with China. And so China wants to see how far it can push that, how far it can pull Paris towards itself. There are problems in that relationship, of course. Electric vehicles really damage France's domestic industry. And so that's what the two leaders have to figure out this week.
And once he leaves France, the Chinese leader will also be heading to Serbia and Hungary. Just quickly, help us explain to our viewers the significance of these visits.
Well, China has been wooing Central and Eastern Europe for over a decade now, actually, and largely out of the attention of the Anglosphere. And what is happening is basically China's dredging up historical grievances. For example, with Serbia, there is this... in 1999, there was a bombing of a Chinese embassy in Belgrade, which basically united the two countries at the hands of NATO, which united the two countries against NATO. So they're going to be dredging that up. The anniversary is actually tomorrow. And then otherwise, it's about money. It's a huge amount of investment. China is the single biggest investor in both Serbia and Hungary, and in return, Serbia and Hungary are European allies for China. They fight Hungary fights China's corner in the EU. Serbia kisses the Serbian President Alexander Vučić kisses the Chinese flag when China delivers 1 million Sinopharm vaccines. So all of this stuff is positive PR for China, and it really values that kind of friendship when it comes to a world that seems to be getting ever more hostile.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Let's return to the situation in the Middle East. As we mentioned earlier, 100,000 Rafah residents and refugees have been told to move to what Israel is calling an expanded humanitarian zone near Khan Yunis. But Gazans say the area is already overcrowded. Fergal Keane has more details.
They haven't had reason to dance for a long time. But they haven't forgotten how. Even amid uncertainty about Israel's position, hope springs. Across Gaza, BBC journalists captured the reaction of those convinced, perhaps prematurely, that a ceasefire will happen.
The feeling is indescribable. We're so happy we're going back to our home in Gaza City.
We're refugees from the north and we fled here, this young man says. We're so happy there's a ceasefire. Israelis are still absorbing the news. It came late on one of this society's most important days, when across the country sirens bring the nation to a halt in memory of the dead of the Holocaust. A day of reflection in a country traumatized by the Hamas attack last October. Tonight on the streets of Tel Aviv, those who believe healing that trauma can begin with a ceasefire deal and the release of Israel's hostages.
We expect from the Israeli government to take this deal to save all the remaining hostages who are still alive.
But after 7 months of a war in which Israel's army pledged to destroy Hamas, a ceasefire deal that fails to accomplish that risks breaking Israel's wartime coalition government. Israel will send negotiators to talks but won't stop fighting yet.
We examine every proposal very seriously, and we review every possibility on the issue of negotiations and the return of the hostages to their homes as quickly as possible and as a central task. At the same time, we carry on with our operations in the Gaza Strip and will continue to do so.
This morning, the people of eastern Rafah woke to leaflets telling them to evacuate. Many have been displaced before, but still they were told to leave. Everyone, no matter how old, how young, or how vulnerable.
ومعنا صغارنا واطفالنا ومرتي وامي والعيله وكلنا والله ما احنا عارفين نروح مش عارفين وين نروح.
To Al-Mawasi, Israel says, and other desolate places beyond Rafah. The so-called humanitarian zones were to be expanded, but they've never been safe from sickness, hunger, or war. This is the aftermath of raids on Rafah last night. People hope these may have been some of the last airstrikes if the ceasefire can be made to work. News of the Hamas announcement was still hours away. Nisreen Raja, mother and refugee. For 7 months, this has been the daily reality. Hani Ashtar, an orphan, grieved by his relative Reem. His family was killed during the war, she says. Even he was killed. So many here are grieving and exhausted. Late tonight, Israel attacked eastern Rafah, where they told people to leave. Celebration had turned to fear, and the hope that tomorrow might bring peace. Fergal Keane, BBC.
We're going to move away from the Middle East now, and former US President Donald Trump has been held in contempt of court for violating a gag order for the 10th time in his hush money trial in New York. Justice Juan Merchan issued his most serious warning yet to Mr. Trump, saying further violations could mean jail. And this is the second gag order ruling of the trial, earlier in the hush money proceedings. Judge Merchan sided with the prosecution and fined Mr. Trump $1,000 each for 9 violations. Later, the Starliner, a brand new spacecraft, will make its first crewed test flight. 2 NASA astronauts will be heading to the International Space Station, as Palab Ghosh explains.
Ready for launch. Right on top is Boeing's Starliner spacecraft. It's the latest private sector launch to the International Space Station. This is Starliner's first test flight with a crew. It's 5 metres high and 4.5 metres wide. It can carry up to 7 astronauts into low Earth orbit, but this time it'll be carrying just 2. During the mission, the crew will test the spacesuits and seats, assess the onboard life support and navigation systems, and evaluate the system that moves cargo to the International Space Station. If all goes to plan, Starliner will be certified for regular supply missions.
And liftoff.
Its first uncrewed test flight in 2019 didn't make it to the space station because of a software fault. A second attempt in 2022 did make it, but there were issues with some of the thrusters and the craft's cooling system. And on Earth, Boeing has been facing growing scrutiny because of faults with some of its aircraft.
This is the big one. This is the first test flight with humans on board. They've had a few problems on earlier test flights, I think it's fair to say. So there's a lot riding on this one.
The astronauts, in their new blue lightweight suits, have reassured those close to them that the faults have been fixed and the spacecraft is safe to fly.
We're here because we're all ready. And our families and friends have heard about it along the way. We've talked about all the issues that we've encountered, and I think they're happy and proud that we've been part of the process to fix it all.
The astronauts will dock 24 hours after liftoff and return after 10 days. They'll experience Starliner's landing system, which will touch down on land in the deserts of the southwestern United States. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
Now to one of the most glamorous nights on the New York social calendar, an evening for celebrities to test their fashion boundaries, producing a red carpet full of outrageous, daring and dazzling outfits. I'm talking about the Met Gala Ball. It is being held in Manhattan tonight, and this year's theme is the Garden of Time. Now, I spoke to fashion journalist and author Amy Odell about why the event is so important.
The Met Gala is the Super Bowl of red carpets. It is the biggest, most lavish, internationally recognized red carpet event of the year. It has eclipsed the Oscars in terms of cultural significance. Anna Wintour has been planning it since 1995 in her capacity as editor-in-chief of Vogue magazine. And she plans it with a mercurial attention to detail, even down to the ingredients in the food. For instance, chives, garlic, parsley, and onions are banned from the food because she believes that it makes guests' breath smell and get stuck in their teeth. She also pays attention to everything her guests are doing inside the party. She doesn't want people to be on their cell phones. When Kim Kardashian attended in 2019 wearing a dress that was so tight she couldn't sit down, Anna was asking her staff, why isn't she sitting?
Yeah, certainly does have an eye on the details, doesn't she? Tell us a bit about this year's theme then and what we can expect.
This year's dress code is the Garden of Time. Interestingly, Anna Wintour apologized on television this morning for the, quote, confusion that was caused by the dress code, which is different from the theme of the Costume Institute exhibition, Sleeping Beauties. The exhibition I saw at the Met Museum this morning, it's beautiful. It showcases around 250 items of fashion from the Costume Institute's collection. The reason it's called Sleeping Beauties is because some of the gowns are so fragile and special that they have to be exhibited lying down in glass cases. But many of the looks in the show are actually inspired by nature. So we'll see a lot of people on the red carpet tonight wearing things evocative of gardens and plants and maybe birds and things like that.
And Amy, we understand that TikTok CEO Shouzi Chu is an honorary chair at this year's event. Why is a tech CEO involved in an event most associated with fashion?
Well, Anna Wintour's primary function as the chair of this event is to raise money for it and to find sponsors. And she has been going in recent years to tech titans because that's where the money is. She approached Sam Bankman-Fried and tried to get him to sponsor one Met Gala, and he never ended up doing it. But we've seen tech people like Elon Musk, like Jeff Bezos, who will be attending tonight with his fiance, Lauren Sanchez. This will be her first Met Gala. Everyone's excited to see what she's going to be wearing. So this is how she's been able to raise the enormous amount of money that she is able to pull in every year to make this event really special and really elaborate.
All right, let's take a look at how things are going down at the Met Gala. We've got some latest pictures for you. You can see Ariana Grande there in her dress at the bottom of the stairs. And the Met Gala is seeing guests arrive on the red carpet. This is fashion's biggest night of the year, as we mentioned. And the event raises money for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Tickets are rumored to cost upwards of $70,000 US. And you can see a lot of the biggest stars in the world arriving for this event. We'll leave you with pictures of the Met Gala, and I'll see you again soon.
Hello. Well, your bank holiday Monday probably came with a rain interruption at some point. It was pretty unsettled. Some lengthy spells of rain across the southeast of England, but plenty of showers elsewhere. Others, though, managed some sunshine, and in Lincolnshire we had 11 hours of sun, so it wasn't so bad there, whereas others had the downpours. And across parts of northern England, had a couple of funnel clouds spotted, one over Saddleworth Moor and another one in the Derbyshire area. The weather is going to be improving, though, over the next few days as a ridge of high pressure starts to move its way in, and that will tend to settle the weather down. Slow process. We've still got a bit of rain left over across southeast England, one or two showers elsewhere, but these will tend to fizzle over the coming hours. And temperatures as we start off Tuesday morning, generally around 8 to 10. The coldest spots down to about 5 degrees. And that's probably where we'll have the best of the early morning sunshine. Now, where you do start off the day cloudy, and particularly around some of these North Sea coasts, it could be quite grey. Some mist and fog patches around, a few spots of drizzle, but it is an improving picture for the majority. Cloud will thin and break up with sunny spells becoming widespread into the afternoon. Outside chance for a shower? Yeah, it's possible. Perhaps across the hills of Wales and southwest England, one or two elsewhere, but not as many as we've seen over recent days. The vast majority of you will have a dry day and it will feel warmer. The sunshine comes out. The high pressure continues to build in for Wednesday, but we do have weather fronts that will try to sneak in from the northwest. So Wednesday, again, it should be a fine day for the vast majority of the country. Certainly England, Wales, most of Northern Ireland looking dry with spells of warm sunshine, probably quite hazy sunshine. There will be some high cloud in the sky, but across the Hebrides, Highlands, Orkney and Shetland, it will turn cloudy, quite windy with outbreaks of rain moving in. In the sunshine, though, temperatures more widely climbing into the low 20s, so feeling progressively warmer. Thursday, you've still got a risk of a few showers this time for Scotland. Otherwise, some broken cloud and sunny spells. Should be another dry day for most areas of Northern Ireland, England and Wales. And again, those temperatures continue to climb. We're up to 19 in Belfast. The warmest weather probably across eastern England, where temperatures will reach around 22, possibly 23 degrees Celsius. That is going to feel warm in the sunshine. And there is more of that sunshine as we finish the week and head into the weekend, albeit probably with an increasing risk of seeing some showers moving in. That's today's weather. Bye-bye.
The future is already here.
Lights, camera, action. All about AI changing our jobs.
Where do you see this technology moving in the future?
A flipping burger robot.
From gadgets to gaming.
The virtual reality landscape has changed quite a bit.
May the best driver win. It won't be me.
Sustainability to AI.
By using giant nets and AI robots to deal with plastic pollution.
This is where the technology is being tested.
Fake.
Yay! I'm enjoying. Do you enjoy?
Yeah, this is good. This is good.
The latest developments from the world of tech.
I could come up with a date predicting when you would die.
Pat your head, rub your stomach.
This is actually a floating solar farm, and it's a pretty impressive sight.
I think it's quite cool.
Wow! That went right through me!
Click. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
The art of good conversation is to say the right thing at the right time and in the right way. You have to be original, sympathetic, encouraging, and also keep an open mind. And you really do just need to sit back and listen.
Catty Kay chats with prominent names from the worlds of business, science and culture.
Influential with me, Catty Kay. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
More trouble for Boeing as it faces a new investigation in the US, this time over the 787 Dreamliner. Plus, we'll look at how boycotts related to the war in Gaza are affecting companies like Starbucks and McDonald's. Hello and welcome to Asia Business Report. I'm Steve Lai. Now, the US regulator has opened a new investigation into Boeing. It comes after the plane maker acknowledged that some employees may have failed to carry out proper quality inspections on 787 Dreamliners. From New York, BBC's Michelle Fleury has more.
Boeing's work is once again in the spotlight. America's air safety regulator, the Federal Aviation Authority, has opened a new investigation into Boeing after the company came forward and said some employees had committed misconduct by claiming certain tests had been completed when in fact they hadn't. Now, the FAA is investigating whether Boeing completed inspections to confirm adequate bonding and grounding where the wings joined the main body of the plane on certain 787 Dreamliner aircraft. Bonding and grounding is vital on a plane because it prevents static buildup. Think of it as electrical safeguards. Boeing credited a South Carolina worker who saw something they felt was wrong on the production line and came forward and reported it. Cutting corners at work is something that many of us may have been guilty of at various times in our lives. But given the frequency with which quality control issues keep coming up at Boeing, the airline has a long way to go to regain the trust of the flying public, its customers, the airlines, as well as lawmakers.
Shares dropped sharply on the news of the new investigation. The company has told the FAA that it will re-inspect all 787 jets on the manufacturing line and develop an action plan to address concerns about planes already in service. Now, in other news, in recent months, as Israel's war in Gaza has intensified, we've seen consumers boycotting brands with perceived links to Israel. Major fast food chains like McDonald's and KFC have reported a drop in sales as a direct result of the boycotts. And one of the main demands of protesters in the US is that their universities stop investing in companies linked to Israel, like Google, Microsoft, and defense contractor Lockheed Martin. Ian Lee, who teaches strategic management at Carleton University, told me more about the impact.
It's very important to distinguish between sanctions versus boycotts. Sanctions are imposed by countries, by nation states. Boycotts are imposed by individual groups, protest groups against particular companies. So this is very important. The second distinction is the boycott against the company because of something the company did inside its company. Think of Anheuser-Busch in the United States last year in its activities that enraged many consumers, and that boycott was effective. But secondary boycotts, that is to say, boycotting a company because they're involved with a country that people are opposed to, is less successful in the research literature. We have to make those very important distinctions, I think, in terms of analyzing the success or failures of these boycotts.
Yeah, another distinction perhaps to note is that these brands often operate a franchise model, so boycotts impact local franchisee holders more directly than the brands themselves.
Indeed. In fact, that's an additional point to make. We have to distinguish between the franchise versus the corporate head office. And secondly, is it impacting sales or is it impacting the brand? The research on this shows that the sales hit is not as significant generally, but the hit to the brand, the damage to the brand, is much more significant. And so this is not to suggest that boycotts don't work. It's just that they have an impact that people may not realize. It's not the sales decline, it's the impact to the brand, which we can see in, for example, the decline in the share price.
Yeah, and brands also sit up and take notice when these things happen to them as well. Most brands don't want to get dragged into politics, though, do they?
Exactly. The large corporations tend to be very, very averse to bad publicity. They're not political actors, and so the last thing they want is to be in the national news or the international news for bad reasons. And they avoid negative publicity like the plague. So their job is they try to minimize and avoid it completely.
The European Union has approved the $14.9 billion purchase of US steel by Japan's Nippon Steel. In a move viewed as a formality, the European Commission said it cleared the deal because the firms will have limited market positions resulting from the proposed transaction. The acquisition has faced opposition in the United States, with President Joe Biden saying he believes the US steelmaker should remain domestically owned. A Chinese electric vehicle maker NIO is making progress on plans to launch a car that's targeted at the mass market. The company's website for its sub-brand Onvo went live in China on Monday. Visitors are told to stay tuned for details of a new EV model, the L60. NIO's chief executive William Li has said the L60 will take aim at rival Tesla's Model Y. That is currently the world's best-selling EV. Now, in an interview with a leading Indian newspaper, India's foreign minister has defended blocking investments from China. He said India cannot compromise on national and economic security while trying to open up the economy. The BBC's Arunaday Mukherjee has more.
India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar was speaking to the Economic Times when he said that it was about protecting domestic businesses, especially the small and medium enterprises. Also, batting away allegations of becoming a protectionist economy, the Foreign Minister also said it was about protecting the interests of the working class in the country. Just to put things in context, relations between India and China have been at their lowest ever since the 2020 violent altercation along the Indo-China frontier over a territorial dispute. Back then, in protest, India had banned hundreds of Chinese apps, including TikTok, from operating here. New Delhi has since been pushing domestic manufacturing and incentivizing businesses to move production from China to India to help offset the huge trade deficit with Beijing. Now, this is what it all boils down to. India imports way more from China than it actually exports. According to some studies, the trade deficit in the last 5 years has gone up to just a little less than $400 billion. So despite the tough talk, these are the realities that India is facing. It's an aspect that has worried both economists as well as strategic affairs experts.
Asia is home to some of the world's best-loved cuisines, which may explain why Western food has typically struggled to break into the market. But that's starting to change, thanks to higher incomes and better-travelled consumers. One country looking to take advantage of this is the UK. Recently, Asia's biggest food and beverage show came to Singapore, and as a treat, we sent our business reporter, Nick Marsh.
Hungry? Well, you're in the right place. I'm in one of Asia's food meccas. But on display is a who's who of European cuisine. And they're ready to battle it out, bite for bite.
As incomes start to rise, as tastes broaden and travel becomes more common, it's an opportunity for governments not only to sell their products, but also to promote an ideal image of their country. Do you think of anything in particular when you think of food from Britain?
Sausage, I don't know.
Quite boring, actually. Not so special.
But these cheese exporters are here to fly the flag for British gastronomy.
It's a massive job educating people because, you know, the French and the Swiss and the Italians have been doing it a lot longer than we have, and Parmesan's been around forever. So we've come in sort of fairly late, so we're having to get that message across.
And this is what they're up against.
Anyone want tiramisu?
For Italy, selling food to Asia isn't just vital for its economy, it's basically a form of diplomacy.
They're foodies, they love their food, they love their tradition. It's something we had in common, and that it's, you know, makes easier to spread also the Italian culinary tradition around the world.
I'll have a try on that there, thank you.
After Brexit, UK exporters were promised new markets.
Almost dropped it there. That is very good. You did say it was good. This is grass-fed 100% British beef. And these are the people that British producers are betting on. They want them to know, firstly, that this meat exists, and they're hoping, secondly, that they'll like it,
What brand is that?
and eventually, above all, that they're going to buy it.
The reality is that exports to Asia only represent a fraction of what Britain sells to the European Union. The UK government told the BBC that it has hosted events at trade shows in the region to try and drive demand for British food. But the suppliers, well, they don't receive any grants to attend these events in the first place. Unlike other countries, they had to pay out of their own pocket just to be here.
Which makes it very difficult to, stand out against the other European groups or other world groups that, are almost fully funded by government.
This is your VR cheese experience.
Absolutely. Would you like to try?
To keep up, British producers are having to get creative to spread the word, which I enjoyed firsthand.
I'm just cleaning the udder of a cow. Okay, I'm grating the cheese onto the noodles.
But building a reputation doesn't come overnight. Many are still finding their way. Nick Marsh, BBC News, Singapore.
Yeah, it's a good gig if you can get it, Nick. Thanks very much for that, Nick Marsh there. Now, some entertainment news before we go. Stars are arriving at the Met Gala in New York City. The charity event, which raises money for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, is also seen as a showcase for designers of high fashion. There's a lot of money involved as well. Tickets are rumoured to cost upwards of $70,000. That's it for this edition of Asia Business Report. I'll be back with more in an hour. Bye for now.
Ready for a lively debate? Sometimes our panelists agree, and sometimes they don't. There's people with a lot to say, and others who just say enough. Some who want to ask the hard questions, some who want to avoid them, and some who think they have the answers. They're guaranteed to keep you entertained, whether you agree or not. Politics Live with Joe Coburn. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Are you a raver?
Do I look like a raver?
I've got bass in a backpack. This is amazing.
Dancing for like 4 or 5 hours of a gig, you could generate about 800 kilowatt hours of thermal energy. So that's a lot of energy.
Right, so shall we give it a taste then? It's my favourite.
We're really talking to the plants, and they're telling us how happy they are.
It can fly, but it can also float on water.
The bots kick off with some swift striking.
Oh my God, that came by quick.
It's all about augmented reality.
Useful then. It's useful.
I scroll through the options with my finger here. Solar system, let's give that one a go. Totally and utterly immersed in another world there.
We've got to consider all of these things if we're going to avoid an apocalyptic fate. But also excited.
The police have found us. I can't believe I'm now wanting to run away from the police. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Click. Tomorrow at 8:30 on BBC News and iPlayer.
The climate of southern Europe is changing. It's becoming more and more like North Africa.
Thousands of people continue to stream across Sudan and South Sudan.
There's riot police everywhere around.
This is not the face of France that Emmanuel Macron wants you to see.
We're having to stay under the trees here because Russian drones are constantly patrolling.
This was the town of Bethania. These were people's homes, but look at it now.
This is the moment they've been waiting for. The pride, the excitement, and the affection is palpable.
This is as close as we can get to Gaza itself, about 5 kilometres in that direction. There is a lot of military activity, jets overhead.
17 days they have spent inside that tunnel. Now they are finally out.
Hello there, I'm Ollie Foster. Here's what's coming up for you on Sports Day. Kyron Wilson